Hello, everyone. Welcome to I'm a Member Now What? How to Talk About ORCID. I'm Kimberly Iniger, Senior Events and Outreach Manager here at ORCID, and I'm located in Michigan in the US. Now that you know a little bit about me, I invite you to share a bit about yourself by participating in the poll that is now open. Before we get started, I'd like to bring your attention to some features available during the webinar to enhance your experience. The first is closed captioning and translated captions. These features allow you to enable audio captions and translate those captions into a few different languages. To enable, click on the Show Captions button in your Zoom toolbar. We also have a dedicated Q&A channel, and we invite you to submit your questions throughout the session. To do so, click on the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar. You can also view questions other attendees have submitted, upvote questions you're interested in, and add comments. We have some helpful documentation available to assist you in accessing these features, which is available in the Resources tab in your Zoom toolbar. Also available in the Resources tab are speaker profiles for today's presenters. Finally, the session is being recorded, and the recording, along with all session materials, will be shared after the session. Now, I am delighted to introduce our presenter today, ORCID Director of Communications, Julie Petro. Julie?
Thank you, Kimberly. As Kimberly said, I am Julie Petro, the Director of Communications for ORCID, and I'm also calling from Michigan. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Today, we're going to talk about how to talk about ORCID. But before we get started, I'm interested in another question, and that is, how well do you understand how ORCID can help you or your users in your work? And I think that that should be coming up, and that's either from 1, no idea, and to 5, you've got a very good understanding of that. And excuse me, while those answers are coming in, I'll just move along here. Since we launched the registry in 2012 and made ORCIDs widely available to anyone who might find them useful, ORCID adoption continues to climb worldwide. Researchers are giving permission to the institutions, publishers, and funders they interact with to get them to add data to and get data from their records. So all of that data is being reused at a growing pace across the entire research ecosystem. And as a matter of fact, last year, about 1.6 billion items found in ORCID records were reused by external systems. And that's up from 1.2 billion items in 2022. And ORCID record holders signed into those systems with their ORCID records almost 70 million times, up from 60 million times from 2022. ORCID data is read over 135 million times per month on average, up from 122 million times in 2022. And there are currently nearly 9 million active users, maybe 8.8 million users, something like that. But the data clearly tells us that adoption is growing. So why is it so hard to talk about? This is our vision statement, and it's a pretty good one. It's ambitious, it's comprehensive, it's like most vision statements are supposed to be. We envision all who participate in scholarly activities are connected to all their contributions across disciplines, borders, and time. And that's pretty clear, right? So, what about our mission statement? So this tells us how we're going to achieve our vision. We enable transparent and trustworthy connections by providing a unique persistent identifier for individuals to use as they engage in their scholarly activities and tasks. And that's pretty clear too, right? So here's another quick poll, and then I promise no more polls until the end. And I'm going to take a look at some of these answers. Um, Kimberly, can we see the answers to some of these, or I'm not sure how I can see these.
I can share the answers to the previous poll after we finish this poll. I'll
I
share
see.
them both.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. All right. So no matter where you fall you could very well be forgiven for maybe having a hard time speaking about Orchid. And it's really important to remember that Orchid has multiple stakeholders that use and benefit uh, from Orchid in a lot of different ways. 1 second. Okay, let me put this away. The polls are giving me a little bit of disrupting my groove just a little bit. So, right. Sorry about that. Okay. So, Orchid has many, many different stakeholders that use and benefit from Orchid in a lot of different ways. And of course, these are all centered around researchers. So, really, we're talking about Orchid being a lot of different things to a lot of different people who take on a lot of different tasks throughout their careers. And then there's the issue of talking about how ORCID enables the interconnectivity of all of this trusted community contributed data that is found in these ORCID records. And we know that you, our member organizations, aren't just talking to your researchers about adopting ORCID, you're also talking to your colleagues to get them to see how ORCID can help reduce your burden in the office so they can help you promote ORCID, or to get interdepartmental buy-in for the resources necessary to build an integration. So it's really no surprise that it's challenging to talk about ORCID. And hopefully this session will help. Today, I'm going to start out by sharing some ideas about how we think ORCID can help make the entire body of scholarly data more robust, even while it helps reduce burden for researchers and institutions alike. But we will spend a lot of time on the promise of this webinar, which is how to talk about ORCID. And if you attended this talk last year, you're aware that the message can be different depending on who you are and who you're talking to. But while there's nuance, there's also a lot of overlap. So please don't be intimidated by the amount of information you're going to hear and see today, and it will be a lot. We know that often when people ask about how to talk about ORCID, what they're really asking is, what exactly do I say? What blurb exactly can I use at the point of single sign into my systems to clarify to my researchers, to my users, why they might want to have an ORCID in the first place? So we'll share some messages that you can use almost word for word, or you can use them to help you frame your own messages that you can tailor to your specific communities. And then I'll go into some detail about some timing and content considerations depending on whether you've already launched an integration or you're just now planning one. You might find that a certain order to disseminating information can help you build momentum and excitement for the launch of your integration, and that's going to only help with adoption. Finally, we will go over some resources that can help, and at the end, I'm hoping to leave quite a bit of time for some Q&A. But we're starting this year's session on how to talk about ORCID with the topic of research integrity, because I'm sure many of you are aware that this is of growing concern around this, and you're probably familiar with some of the recent material that's been published on it. And here's a position statement from COPE about how the publishing world is faced with a large and problematic pollution of the publication record with false and just some inaccurate research. And there's the article from Nature from November of 2023 suggesting that hundreds of thousands of paper mill publications have infiltrated the scientific literature. And earlier this year, there was an article in The Guardian that you may have seen talking about bogus research papers. And it just seems to be growing. So what's causing this? And these are some of the things that are causing this, and I'm sure you're aware of quite a bit of these, and the rising pressure on researchers to publish or perish. And often their career advancements are dependent on peer review publications or citations, and some of the publishing business models that may incentivize volume and speed, which means they may have less time or resources available to devote to quality assurance. And of course, we're all hearing about the rapid uptake of generative AI, and the ease of which more plausible research can be generated is concerning to us, to you. At the QR code on this slide, we have an entire presentation from earlier this year that really does a deep dive on this and clarifies all of these issues and how we think that using the scholarly bona fides found in such as found in an ORCID record, rather than setting ourselves up as an identity verification service, is really far more effective in building these kind of strong integrity focused feedback loops that can drive higher levels of trust and robustness in the scholarly record. One of the big differences between ORCID and, say, another profile like LinkedIn or any other kind of profile is that an ORCID record is meant to be used, not just read or set up with information to be left as is until you remember to update it at some point in the future. They're meant to be used by multiple systems that the researcher chooses to engage with their records. So researchers use their ORCIDs to sign into submission systems or grant application systems. And when they do that, they automatically link that system with their record. And just doing that provides already a base level of trust in that it says this person has control over their particular ORCID record. And they use them for other things like pre-filling forms, for example, or giving the researcher a chance to invite their collaborators to share their IDs as well. And when whatever their work is published, they can have their record automatically updated, which saves them time and gives them a level of confidence that their scholarly record is accurate and they can more easily report back to their institutional funder, for example. And editors involved in this might review the ORCID records of the submitting author or any of the other collaborators during integrity checks. And we know that editors have used ORCID like this for years. And what we've done recently, we've done quite a bit of work to simply make this process easier for them. Reviewers are also using ORCID records or signing into submission systems as well and getting credit for their peer review activity when the publisher adds that back into their records. And there's really an awful lot of information found in ORCID records that can help with these kinds of decisions that reviewers or editors might have to make. You're probably really familiar with the information we have about affiliations and education and other professional activities, like being a member of a society or an editor of a journal, funding that people have received, or publications or other outputs like data sets or data management plans. And of course, peer reviews and links to their other identifiers or website URLs. So there's really a lot of information already on an ORCID record. However, in the context of research integrity, information that's been added by a third party that the researcher trusts can actually be even more useful. So, what we've done here with this work is to try to pull this provenance information, and this information has been in ORCID records since the very beginning, and simply make it more easily visible to anyone looking at the record. Now, we call these green ticks the trust markers, and they're especially effective because they're nuanced enough to recognize that different parties, and please recall our very complicated stakeholder landscape, they will all interpret identity through differing lenses. But they're also clear enough to help users draw quick human-led confusions or conclusions in workflow without disrupting their experience, whether it's an editorial workflow or a grant application review workflow. And there are various responsibilities we think that people have in the community, and that is to provide the information about their corner of the research ecosystem. For example, when research organizations add the affiliation data they hold about their researchers to their ORCID records, that's really helpful to that researcher. Similarly, when publishers add outputs or funders add funding information, grant award information, that's really helpful to that researcher, and it elevates the level of trust in the system as a whole and benefits other people in the community. What we've realized is that over time, the level of trust in a record accumulates. So in the beginning, you start with a record and you add things yourself. which is in and of itself not a problem. And I will say more in a minute about why that is. And in fact, we only recently added the ability for researchers to add a trust marker themselves via their verified institutional address. And you can read more about that at the QR code there at the bottom of the slide. I'm not sure, Kimberly, did you add I just saw a notification come by in the chat. Did you add that link there too?
Yep, the link's in the chat and in the resources.
Thank you. Okay, so you can check there for a little more information about that. We're very excited. It was very recently released. So back to your record. As you progress through your career, you connect with more systems, like you give Crossref permission to auto update your record with all of your journal articles, or your institution can contribute data about your employment or education, or your funder might add award data. And after not too much time at all, you can end up with a very robust record with data that by this time has likely been reshared with still more external systems, which overall strengthens, of course, the robustness of your record. Again, this has always been possible, though, as we've learned, the concept of trust markers has not been well understood or it's been misunderstood outside of ORCID. For example, lots of people don't realize that provenance data has always been in ORCID records. But finding that data, especially in large or well-populated records, and of course, we're always encouraging a well-populated record. This can be time consuming and really tricky since sometimes those markers can be buried like in a collapsed view. So we've spent a lot of time and effort over the past few years making changes to the user interface of an ORCID record and just basically raising awareness about provenance data in ORCID records and the trust markers that can accompany that data that's been added by members. All of this just makes at a glance just much easier to find these trust markers. That's just one of the things that we've done. We've also developed record summaries. Now, we started this work last year with publishers to summarize the contents of ORCID records and then embed them directly within their workflows in front of the people that need to make these integrity checks. So they can make the assessments they need to make to know the author is who they say they are, to affirm who they are, and then go from there. And the development of trust markers and record summaries, really want to point out this was done in consultation with our Research Advisory Council. And in speaking with them, we learned that these summaries we made available for editorial workflows, for example, aren't just of interest to editors or to grant managers. It's actually of use to other researchers when they're looking at other people's ORCID records and just general visitors to the ORCID registry. So earlier this year, we embedded the summary directly into the main user interface. And you can expand it to see everything that's available to editors or grant managers. And this happens to be a screenshot of the record summary of our director of product, Tom de Moranville. So we are all having a lot of fun looking at our own record summaries, of course. And they're more common in ORCID records than you might think. There's this myth out there that there are a lot of empty records, and in reality, it's actually more common to find ORCID records with things in them than not, especially when you consider the set of records that are currently in use. Now, we've issued over 20 million IDs, and there is a subset of those, just under 9 million, that are actively being used year over year. And these are the ones that are actually submitting publications. They're the ones that are applying for grants. They're the ones that are having their institutions add affiliation data. And when you look at those, you can see that nearly 4 million of them have some kind of trust marker in them. And that just represents the information that's been added by an ORCID member. Of course, there are a lot more rich with data if you consider the self-asserted data as well. Now, another way to visualize this is imagine the entire ORCID registry, our body of data, affiliation data, where researchers work, where they were educated, what contributions they make to other scholarly outputs like peer review or who funded them, and about their research outputs themselves like publications or data sets. So all of this information, regardless of where it comes from or what it is, it converges in an ORCID record. Now, right now, if we bottled up all of that data, you might see that it has more of a blue tinge to it that we've assigned to represent self-assertions. Now, this is because in our earlier years, researchers adopted ORCID at a quicker pace than organizations did. And if you look, there's still an unevenness in adoption across our stakeholder groups, which is why you'll find trust markers on more publication data than you will on funding data, for example. We are, though, starting to notice an increase of trust markers that depicts community contributed data, though. And over time, we can expect to see more and more of these trust markers in the registry, shifting the color of this from that blue to that green, even as the entire body of data grows. Now, at ORCID, we're doing a lot of things to help move this along. First, we're making it easier for members to adopt ORCID at their institutions with more technical support or with more ways to contribute data to ORCID records, such as via certified service providers, which I'll talk about in a little while. And as the newly released ability for researchers themselves to add trust markers via their validated email domains, of course. We also believe that just the ability to visualize the provenance of data in an ORCID record in this way can help itself over time, since now with the record summaries, it's easier for organizations to see the trust markers associated or not with the data that is about them in an ORCID record. Or it might inspire a researcher who hasn't updated their record in a while to check into whether one of the organizations they're affiliated with, whether they're integrated with the ORCID registry by now and granting permissions to contribute data to the record. So eventually, what we hope to see is the overall growth of trust markers in the ORCID registry, which will mean to us that a vast majority of data found in ORCID records has been contributed by organizations, rather than it being necessary for researchers to assert that data themselves. Because we know that researchers would much rather be doing their research than managing all of the data about their research. And again, this is the data that gets propagated and reused throughout external systems throughout the ecosystem, manuscript submission systems, funding application systems, everywhere. And this is the part we feel ORCID has to play, and more specifically, ORCID members have to play in helping to address the crisis of trust in research. In fact, this relates directly to the mission statement that I mentioned earlier, to enable transparent and trustworthy connections between researchers, their contributions, and their affiliations as they engage in their work. Now, trust markers are present in the ORCID registry largely because members add data to ORCID records, with the exception of the trust markers associated with verified email domains that I mentioned earlier. And I'll say that again, besides researchers themselves, only ORCID members are able to add data to ORCID records when they're given permission by the researcher. And this is by design. Although we are an open registry, meaning anyone can read or ingest the data that's been made publicly available by the researcher, only organizations who have agreed to our membership terms of service and who are members are able to contribute data. However, and this is very important, we apply trust mechanisms to all data in the registry, regardless of whether it has been self-asserted or contributed by a member. Our terms of use prevent misrepresentation and give us recourse to act when records are disputed by anyone in the community. We have machine learning algorithm that detects spam, and any disputed records are removed from use pending correction or withdrawal. Remember, trust markers clarify the data's provenance and make it easier for consumers of that data to decide for themselves if it meets the requirements for their use case. And this has the net effect of reducing effort. So giving an editor or a grant reviewer less things to check or double check when assessing a researcher's scholarly bona fides during the submission process. And no matter how many trust markers there are in the registry, there will always be self-asserted data in ORCID records, and there will always be perfectly good reasons why a researcher has to self-assert. Perhaps the organization that they're affiliated with doesn't contribute data yet, or they don't exist in the same form that they used to when they were working with them, or they're recording an historical output. Many of you have probably seen this graphic before. It's what we call the virtuous circle. It's a pretty useful metaphor to show everything that I've been talking about, how researchers might reuse the contents of their ORCID record throughout their careers. And even though a lot of people refer to their ORCID records as a profile, in reality, ORCID behaves more like a hub of reusable profile data. And that data just gets propagated throughout all of these nearly 5,700 now external scholarly systems that researchers interact with, and it saves them huge amounts of time and effort. And it helps them demonstrate their identity through these trustworthy scholarly bona fides that have been added by our members. Now, this virtuous circle or the community trust network is really simplified in this format. In reality, it's far more complicated, and it involves other PID providers such as ROAR that provides PIDs for organizations, or DataCite that provides DOIs for works and grant awards. And I think that Kimberly just shared this, and you'll notice a QR code at the bottom of this slide to a video recently published by OA Switchboard that helps explain how it all works together with all of the organizations involved. It does a really great job of explaining the process in detail, and I highly recommend you watch it. But again, what this diagram is meant to convey is that whatever data is in an ORCID record will get propagated and reused throughout all of the scholarly systems that the researchers interact with, which is why it's so important for us to help our members and to help other consumers of ORCID data understand more clearly the provenance of that data, because it depends on every organization in our community taking their share of ownership and responsibility for contributing the authoritative data that they hold about researchers in their corner of the research world. So, how does all of this information get shared with various stakeholder groups? Um, if you were if you joined us last year for this presentation, some of these slides will be very familiar to you, although we're slowly evolving some of the messaging as we promised that we would over time, as we learn more, as we talk to people more, as we develop our own thinking more. So as we go through these slides, you might see some text in red here, which notes that these are some things that are clarifying or refining some of these messages. But this slide is about the researchers and how they are at the center of our universe, and they're at the center of everything that we do here. And to researchers, we feel like that the value proposition is that their ORCID is all of their research information accessible via their own unique profile that they can use whenever they need it. And when you're talking to researchers about what ORCID is, you can mention that it helps distinguish them from all the other researchers that have the same or similar names, and that they're always in control of what information they choose to display publicly and what information to keep private. And since it's a name independent identifier, using it can future proof their research identity, since it remains consistent throughout their career, even if they change names, even if they publish something in another language, even if their name, the format of their name changes in any way, it can future proof their career that way. You can also let them know that because ORCID is integrated with a growing number of research systems and workflows, like manuscript submission platforms or grant application platforms, that this is going to make their lives a lot easier. So our primary value, we believe, to researchers is how we allow all of these systems to interconnect in that, again, that hub of research data that they themselves control. And I want to mention again, in our earlier days, there were less organizations adding data to the records. So the records were less useful, but now it's much more possible to have a record that's rich with data added by the organizations that they trust and have given permission to, maybe like yours, that can really streamline the submission process for articles, for example, or grant applications by pre-filling the forms. So in short, this is ORCID 2 Research is a portable profile data that they can reuse in a lot of different workflows. And each of our stakeholder groups have benefits that follow along similar themes. For universities and research institutions, when you integrate your systems with ORCID, you can easily stay up to date with the research that comes from your scholars, and you get to make their lives easier in the process. So, for example, ORCID ensures accurate and consistent attribution of your researchers' work, even if they change affiliation or names. And because you've contributed the data that you hold about that researcher to the record, you can more easily preserve the contributions made by alumni and retired researchers to your research legacy. Other things that you might say is researchers with ORCID IDs are more discoverable. And when you add the data that you hold about your researchers to their records, it not only helps them in their own careers, but it can enhance your reputation and increase the visibility of your research outputs. When you add validated data to records, which again is an exclusive member benefit, you elevate the overall trustworthiness of the entire global research infrastructure as that data is used and reused across platforms. Please don't worry about reading or memorizing any of this. We're going to be sharing this presentation with everyone shortly after this is over. But when you're talking to researchers as a research institution, your messages really should include ideas about how ORCID helps them as they go about the tasks that build or manage their careers, such as submitting manuscripts or applying for funding. And be sure to emphasize that allowing you to add their affiliation data or other data, employment, education, qualifications, invited positions, this is what can actually help them save time down the line. When you're talking to your colleagues, you can talk about how ORCID can help streamline your own internal processes and help you as an institution uphold research integrity as well as elevate the research produced at your institute. And those messages may likely resonate. For publishers, you can streamline workflows for authors and co-authors, editors and reviewers, and you can improve the overall value of your books and journals when you adopt ORCID. Of course, collecting ORCID IDs at the time of submission helps ensure that you know exactly who your authors and your co-authors are, and you can accurately attribute authorship and co-authorship of published works to the right people. And you now have the opportunity to embed record summaries, and it can help you streamline editorial processes such as peer reviewer selection by discovering possible conflicts of interest, or by more easily allowing editors to assign reviewers based on their history or demonstrated expertise. And of course, when you add peer review data to ORCID records, you can give important recognition for your peer reviewers for their valuable contributions to your entire review process, your editorial process. And as with universities and research institutions, when you take advantage of the member benefit of adding the validated data you hold about your authors, your co-authors, and your peer reviewers to their records, you elevate the overall trustworthiness of the entire global research infrastructure as that data ends up getting reused across different platforms. So for publishers, when you talk to your authors and co-authors, you want to emphasize recognition, how ORCID will help them gain recognition for their work or for their contributions, and how that data in their ORCID records gets reused by other systems such as grant application forms. And we find this is especially important in systems that require the use of ORCID. You can mandate authors to have an ORCID, and they'll get one and they'll use it with your system, but they might not realize just how useful it can be in other workflows besides your own. So they might not think to connect with their institutions or other systems, which means that the data that they could be getting from those systems won't make it into yours and vice versa. So it's in your best interest to educate your authors about the comprehensive value of ORCID, and not just how it's going to help them in your system, which it will. So for your colleagues, you definitely want to highlight research integrity, making sure authors are who they say they are. ORCID is an easy to use online profile system popular among researchers and peer reviewers that provides trustworthy data added by authenticated third parties and available in a summarized view. For funders and facilities, integrating grant application and management systems with ORCID can help funders reduce the burden of administering awards and measure impact of your funding in a more cost-effective way, even beyond the period of performance. It can help you be sure you've awarded the correct applicant, which of course preserves the integrity of your downstream analysis. And similar to publishers, you can more easily identify possible conflicts of interest and maybe assign reviewers based on their expertise or experience. It can also help facilitate the assessment of research outcomes, allowing you to make more informed decisions about grant awards and track the impact of that funding over time. And of course, it can help you with accurate, unambiguous attribution of researchers in their contribution. And this reduces the risk of misidentification and increases the probability of discovery, even beyond, again, the period of performance. And it's really important to know that ORCID data adheres to FAIR principles, which increases the integrity, the transparency, and the reproducibility of research and helps accelerate knowledge and discovery. If you're interested in learning more about how ORCID thinks about the FAIR principles and how we enable FAIR data, I believe that we have a blog post about that we will share very shortly, or after the fact, but we have a really nice blog post that dives in deep about how ORCID is fair in the way we're set up and how it enables the sharing of fair data. By now, you might see there's a lot of overlap with some of these messages. Funders, you want to encourage your applicants not only to get an ORCID for the sake of your grant application workflow, but to let them know that if you add data to their records, they can use it in other workflows, which will make their lives easier over time. And we know that our community, that our researchers, that publishers, that our community would really love to see funders start writing grant data to ORCID records. For your colleagues, you can tell your colleagues how ORCID can help you corroborate scholarly bona fides and know your researchers a little better. And it can also help you provide metrics about the impact of the research that you fund or facilitate, even beyond the period of performance. Government agencies and policymakers can know that when they adopt ORCID, or when they develop PID strategies at a national level, they can elevate the transparency and integrity of their country's research strategy. With this trusted data contributed by the research community about the affiliations, the research outputs, and the funding. And we know that you not only want to know your researchers, you want to know the research that's emerging from your country or region. ORCID can give you the confidence that your researchers and their contributions have been properly attributed so that you can glean better data to inform your decision making, for example, or to refine policy or to clarify expectations for your research community. And you can do this when you better understand the full impact of your research efforts across a wide variety of platforms that are used in your scholarly ecosystem. And as I mentioned, we have close to 6,000 systems connected to ORCID, many of which are adding trusted data to some of your researchers' ORCID records. The growing community network of data contributions mean there is perhaps a lot to discover about your researchers' activities and outputs, which can give you more insights about how you might set your own research priorities. And of course, you also benefit from the ability to reuse existing validated data found in your researchers' ORCID records about their research outputs in your critical assessment exercises. And as with funders, you benefit from ORCID data that adheres to FAIR principles. As a government agency or policymaker, when you talk to your researchers, messages should include ideas about how ORCID helps them as they go about the tasks that build or manage their careers, such as submitting manuscripts or applying for funding. Very similar to what a research institution might tell their researchers. Be sure to emphasize that a lot of organizations they interact with are probably going to be asking to add data to their records. And by allowing them to do that, they're helping to make their own lives easier and they're helping to build their own careers. As for your colleagues, we think it'll likely resonate that ORCID is used extensively throughout the globe and can help you uphold research integrity and elevate the research of your country or your region, sorry. Now, vendors and service providers are a bit more complex since they serve publishers, funders, researchers, and other research institutions kind of as a go-between, as a midpoint. But the good news is you'll likely find some useful messages from other stakeholder groups that are appropriate. What you really need to know as a service provider is that by connecting your services to ORCID, you can increase the value you provide to the scholarly community as you enable the exchange of this high quality, trusted data found in ORCID records. The data found in ORCID records can increase the precision of your researcher profiles, regardless of the popularity, variability, or the language of their names. And the wide variety of data you can find in ORCID records can give you a broader view of a researcher's or an institution's or a funder's contribution, and you can create better insights for your customers. While the standardized data that is found in ORCID records can allow you to automate processes. And when you add links to ORCID records, you can improve the visibility and the discoverability of your own services. ORCID will reduce your burden as well. You can allow ORCID single sign-in to your systems, and when it comes to reporting, our growing number of trusted community data contributors means easier access to high-quality data. Now, whether you offer manuscript submission systems, grant or facility application management systems, repository systems, research information systems, or discovery systems, you are a very important piece of the research infrastructure because you enable these connections between those systems and ORCID, sometimes much more quickly than an institution could do on their own. And in fact, one of the first things that we tell our new members when they begin to consider their plans for ORCID adoption is to browse our list of certified service providers to see if they already subscribe to one of the systems that offers built-in ORCID functionality. So I think that Kimberly has a link there to that page. So we invite you to take a look on that page. That's our list of certified service providers. So if you're a vendor or a service provider, you can increase the value of your services and products by certifying. It is free. And when you're certified, you can assure your customers that the integration that you provide them has met the community developed criteria that ensures that they will receive the level of functionality and performance that they expect. So reach out to your engagement lead if you're interested in certifying. Again, it's free, and our technical support team can help guide you through the process. You'll also gain visibility of your services to ORCID member organizations and to the global research community. And this is a slide that shows our current certified service providers. Now, as you can see, we have a number of research information systems and manuscript submission systems, as well as grant and facility application management systems. All right, well, that's a lot. Thank you for staying with me so far. And again, all of these can be found in the resources tab. And I have another question for you. Where are you in your adoption cycle? And I think Kimberly is going to open a poll soon.
Yes, just 1 second. It seems that one is still open.
Ah,
Okay, here we go. Poll is launched.
poll is launched. Okay. The polls make it a little bit tricky to navigate, I'm learning. All right. So let us know whether you're planning, you're developing, you have launched one or more organizations, or if you're not planning one at this time. Um, Regardless, it's never too early to tell your community about ORCID. You should be communicating the value of ORCID no matter where you are in the adoption cycle. A general rule of organizational change is repetition, and keep repeating something until you're positive everyone's sick to death of hearing about it, and then repeat it about 10 more times just to make sure they got the message. That's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's true. It's actually, unfortunately, very true. A lot of people think that they can just say something once and that's enough. I mean, after all, we all work in the scholarly space, and the people we work with are very intelligent, but they are also busy. They're distracted and they have a dozen other things on their to-do list. So it really is okay to keep repeating messages. When you share, what messages can make a difference, though? And so when you're in the planning phase, keep the emphasis on why ORCID. This is going to help solve problems or make things easier. It can help manage or build their careers. It can help them distinguish themselves. It can help them sign into systems and automatically populate forms, and it can enhance their visibility. As you progress in your development and you get closer to the launch date, you can talk more about what ORCID is, how it's their profile with interoperable data that can help ease the burden of some of their scholarly tasks. And it can help ensure that they get credit for their work that they do. And again, there's a lot of repetition here too. So don't be afraid to really repeat yourself, but it's okay to, as you get closer to launch, right before and after launch, be sure to focus more on the how, like give them details about your integration and how to give you permission to add data to their record and how to manage their record. Um, that kind of information you're not going to be wanting to inundate them with very early in the cycle, before you've really gotten them to understand why it's important that you're making this change and that you're offering this service to them. Now, these are suggestions and you can mix up the messages, but please keep in mind that you really should always focus on your users when you tailor your messages. So speak to what they want and what they need from you. Share practical tips or clarify how your integration benefits them specifically. And please remember to keep the language simple, to avoid jargon or acronyms unless you've clearly defined it. We have a number of resources to help out, including the handouts that I've mentioned a few times. And these can be found in the resource tab in Zoom or in our new brand library, which we rolled out last year and we've been building ever since. So we're currently still populating it with items, and we plan to continue to promote that more and more as we add more items. Last year, I believe, you had mentioned, or several people suggested to us that they wanted to have slide decks, and we're currently developing slide decks, and we should have those updated in the brand library shortly. But we also have on-demand events and in-person events, or in-person, quote unquote, webinars like this one. We have a blog that you might want to check out. It has a lot of this information that I've been discussing today about reducing burden or helping to build up trust markers and the trustworthiness of an ORCID record, and all of these that you can find here. And finally, we want to do one last poll. which will be really helpful. Many of you probably have been shifting where you focus your social media attention over the past years, as many of us have been doing. And we're very curious to know where you went. So we've got Facebook, and we post a lot on LinkedIn now. We post a little bit less on Twitter. Um, we are starting to build up Mastodon, and we're just looking at some other things as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. And with that, let's go to some Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I'm going to leave this poll open just a little bit longer, getting a lot of good answers to see where everybody is on social media. Um, did you want to take a look at any of the results from previous polls before we get started?
Let's do that.
Awesome. All right. So right now we're looking at the first poll that we launched about understanding ORCID, and we asked our audience, how well do you understand ORCID, how ORCID can help you or your users? And it seems like people are pretty confident and they understand. So that's great for them. And I think that also means that's good for us that we're sharing our information well and people are able to find it. And
Hopefully people feel a little more confident after this. That's what we're hoping.
right,
Good.
if those of you who responded with a 1 or a 2, if you still have some questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we'll help you as best we can. Our next poll was talking about ORCID. And with those results, we asked our audience, how comfortable are you talking about ORCID? With 1 being, I don't even know where to start, and a 5 being, I talk about it all the time. And it looks like we've got quite a few 3s right there in the middle. So hopefully, if you were a 3 at the start of this presentation, you're now hovering closer to a 4 or a 5. And then when it comes to integrations, this one, I was taking a look at this one live. Looks like everybody's in the integration process somewhere along, which is great. We love to hear that our members are in the process of integrating with ORCID. And then finally, let's take a look at that social media poll. So there's quite a few options here. It looks like most people are utilizing, well, that's surprising, Instagram, which is a lot of our audience is on Instagram along with Facebook, LinkedIn, then Twitter, TikTok, or they don't utilize social media. Someone did indicate other, so if you'd like to share in the chat what other systems you're using, that would be awesome to learn. Julie, I noticed nobody here has indicated that they're on Mastodon, but I know that we've been on Mastodon for about a year and a half now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, anything you want to share about Mastodon to perhaps encourage people to check it out?
Yeah, I would say that we've gotten some good engagement there. I think that wow, and just watching the trends after, the seismic shift that was the changes at Twitter, there was kind of a scurrying of everybody kind of running um, to different platforms and kind of staking out their claims in different platforms. And after that, Mastodon was one of the places that we had heard a lot of people were going to, and we still get a lot of um, great feedback, of great engagement. A Mastodon, I think some people may be somewhat hesitant to join Mastodon because of like the federated kind of concept. I haven't found it um, too difficult to find people, regardless of that. But I know that there's a little bit of a perception that it's kind of hard to use. Regardless, we're still using it and we still get good engagement. And I think that we could maybe share our link tree. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
That is the last link here in the chat, and it's also the Connect
Yes.
with
Thank
Us
you.
link in the resources. So that link tree has a bunch of useful links and places where you can connect with us. And if you do check out Mastodon, let us know and we'll connect with you there too. So this question we got in the chat during the session, just wondering, do you know of any potential barriers for researchers getting an ORCID? Is it possible that some researchers are hesitant to get their ORCID ID? Is any idea why that barrier may be there?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Gilda. That's an interesting question. As far as physical barriers go, there are no physical barriers for a researcher getting an ORCID. As a matter of fact, the name ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor ID, and we designed ORCID to be as open as possible for anyone who feels they might get some benefit out of having an ORCID to get an ORCID. So we're very open in that way. I think in my view, the biggest barrier for people getting an ORCID might be that they don't see how they can use it. It's just another profile system. That's what we hear a lot. And that's why I really want to emphasize that it's different because it's meant to be used. It's not meant to just sit there like an electronic CV. Although, if it's really well populated, if your ORCID record is really well populated, it can serve that function too. But I think that as more and more people understand that their ORCID record, if it's well populated, if they've given their institutions permission to add data to their record, it's going to be really useful to them. And I think that the better job we can do at helping researchers understand that, that's going to lessen their mental barriers of why bother. This is just another thing I have to manage. And hopefully, part of that too is persuading member institutions or member organizations to add that data, because that's the key to really making those ORCID records useful. When a researcher can do a single sign-on and sign on to a grant application system and automatically populate their entire grant application form with all of their data, that's when I think you're really going to start seeing people get it. And people are using it that way now. And I think, and like I mentioned earlier, in our early days, researchers adopted ORCID a lot quicker than organizations did. So it wasn't quite as useful as it is becoming now, more and more over time. I
Thanks,
hope that
Julie.
heard.
So our next question in the Q&A is from Anna, and she would like to know, um, her organization has a custom-built knowledge management system where they collect all research by our faculty and researchers, and they would like to integrate ORCID into their system, but they're unsure of the best way to proceed. Since the system is not a commercial solution, we will likely need more individualized guidance. What's
Yeah.
the best way for them to start?
Sure, that's a great question, Anna. There's several ways that you can integrate your systems with the ORCID registry, and I mentioned a few of them during the course of this meeting. The certified service providers. That's one. That's one method. Or a lot of our member organizations build custom solutions. To integrate their systems with the ORCID registry. And that's certainly something that as a member you would get a little bit of guidance with. I'm not sure if you're an ORCID member or not, but if you are, you could reach out to either your consortia lead if you're a member. Yes, you are. Thank you. You could reach out. Do you know if you're a member of a consortia or if you're a direct member? If you're a member of a direct member, okay, so you would be able to reach out to your engagement lead and have a conversation with them about the best way to proceed. They'll be able to guide you and to kind of help you plan and get your head around how to do that. But we certainly have a lot of custom built solutions too. I hope that helps.
Seems like it does. Thanks, Julie. We have a couple minutes left if anyone else has a final question. This previous question is a good opportunity for me to share a few more links in the chat here. firstly, save the date. We've got two more I'm a Member Now What sessions coming up this year. And if you click that link, it'll show you the next two. Um, we also have our future events that our event calendar is listed here and our on demand. And I want to bring up on demand because we do have a full I'm a Member Now What session about custom integrations, Anna and anyone else that you may want to check out. So it'll be listed there on demand along with all of our other I'm a Member Now What sessions. It doesn't seem like we have any other questions. So, Julie, I think that means that you did an excellent job of explaining and helping out everybody. So I want to say thank you to Julie for this wonderful presentation, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. And I hope we see you all at a future event. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.